let's go ahead with the keynote 2 speaker. We have Maaret here. Let me introduce a little bit more about Maaret before going to about keynote, because she is the one who mentors everyone. In fact, I'm one of the speaker in the European testing, one of the speakers where she mentored me there. And she was working currently with Vaisala, and she already delivered 400 sessions across 25 countries. You name it, she is a programmer, tester, facilitator, organizer, and mentor. And now today she is with us in order to speak with building status or why none of her advice will work for you today. I'm so excited to hear her talk. Over to you, Maaret. And if you'd like to know more about Maaret and what about the session, we also have a video interview over there. Please go ahead and watch it. Over to you, Maaret.
So is the slide up?
Yeah, we can see.
All right. So good morning from Finland. I'm usually not a morning person, so if my thoughts get rambly at some point, it's related to the fact that I usually wake up a few hours later, but I'm so happy to be here. And this is a talk or a summary of ideas that I specially collected for this particular conference. It hasn't been presented anywhere else. And it's kind of like a serendipitous timing, like many of the bugs we find in testing. There's a lot of serendipity, lucky accident involved in it. There was a lucky accident involved in this talk being born as well. I work at Vaisala. My title nowadays is Principal Test Engineer, which basically means I'm a regular tester in one team. I'm a test manager in one of the biggest programs we're running, and I improve testing on the level of the whole organization. I am not a consultant. I'm a hands-on tester. I report bugs still on my day-to-day life, and also that's kind of the foundation that I'm building my whole career of 25 years on. The signature moves that I usually find myself talking about in conferences, however, they are like, there's many stories that I could be telling. In my previous place of work, we did this move where we kicked out the product owner and we did better quality, better value for the customer with less money, all of the stuff that Michael was talking about in the previous talk. By taking ownership, we started doing telemetry. We started understanding exactly what was going on with the customer by feeling more ownership. So that story is definitely something that I love telling, but I'm not going to tell you more of it today. Similarly, I find myself doing things like going into an organization or in a team and just sitting there, and the other people, either the other testers or other developers, looking at me and saying, oh, you'd want me to test this. Oh, you'd want me to click here. Or you'd want me to check this kind of thing. Hey, maybe we should have this kind of testing too. And I'm like, I didn't say anything. I was just there, and they look at my face somehow, and my presence, my being there means that someone is holding space for quality and testing. And this is also very much a signature move that I find myself doing again and again and again in various organizations. So being quiet is a superpower. One of the things I also do a lot is pair testing, kind of like teaching people, learning with people, learning while teaching, and ensemble testing, meaning scaling up the pair into having like a larger group, maybe like 6 people, 8 people on a single computer, and all of us doing testing so that we have to control the person on the keyboard by using our words. So all of us engaged on the same testing. Great way to learn about what you do in testing. But again, that's not the topic of today. I'm also very much into this idea that, you know, I've always been doing exploratory testing. That's my like I'm almost saying like love of my life. I love exploratory testing, but also after 25 years and being also a programmer on the side, automation for me, it's like documentation. I don't want to talk about it all the time, but if it wasn't there, I would have to write other kind of documentation that has so much less value for the repeatability. So again, that would be something I'd love to talk more on at any time. Similarly, I can do moves like the developers are producing too many bugs. I'll just leave and I still get paid if I do that. And a lot of times I do things that, you know, all of these examples are things that I just do them. I show that I'm going that direction. They can stop me from going to that direction. And I can apologize later on if I did the wrong thing. But I haven't needed to apologize a lot in my career. So it's more on the other side. I've been praised a lot for these, well, what became then signature moves. And this is just, a sample that I wanted to give you. As I was this summer kind of like developing a new signature move for myself, taking someone about 40 years old from the community, and they had no past history in software development or software testing. I would take them in and I would teach them through pairing with them. I teach them this exploratory testing style where we automate continuously while as a documentation. I would teach them all these kinds of things. I didn't really understand what I was about to be learning, that it is not just me, teaching all these important testing concepts and watching them kind of fly after pairing, fly with them on solo and being actually proficient with them. I didn't realize that I thought I would be teaching this and, just making a list of things. But what I learned is much more relevant, and that's kind of the topic of today. I learned that the things I can teach you, things that I can say that I did this, maybe you should try doing that too, they probably won't work for you. So one of those mornings, going back to the office, my new colleague, the junior tester, who has a past history, past experience in other industries, she comes talking to me and she tells me, being very open and honest, I've asked her for permission to tell this story, of course, to you. She said that she's never felt this insignificant in all of her life. What had happened is that it was yet another one of those weeks where no matter what word she would say in the team, the developers would correct her. Like if she said measurement, they would collect, it needs to be observation. If she said observation, it needed to be measurement. And it wasn't that the words actually weren't understood. It was just that they were pinpointing every single thing that she could be doing differently in an overwhelming style. When she wrote really good bug reports, and she did write really good bug reports, kind of like step-by-step instructions, what to use exactly, then the developers complained that there was too much of an instruction, like they already know this. And how would she know what the other person exactly knows? And if she didn't write enough, she would get the feedback that she needs to be more precise. Like it was almost as if she could never succeed. And again, listening to her kind of like talking to me, telling that even the previous career in service industry, where people sometimes treat people badly, she's never experienced as bad treatment as the team we both were in was giving her, and she felt completely powerless to do anything about that. Unfortunately, I felt powerless too. None of my advice actually works in this situation, because the advice for me is kind of like, I go into the room, I say, hey, I've been doing this for 25 years. I don't even need to say any of that. Just, one of my other younger colleagues says that my persona and presence in that room, it means terror. They're afraid of me. I don't think they should be afraid of me. I'm actually not that intimidating. I'm quite excited about this whole software development and testing thing, and I take things generally more positively. But still, kind of going into that room, they look at me and they say, oh, we need to test. Maaret is here. Because otherwise, I'll just join that work and we'll do that together. But they remember it's important. So some of that stuff that I can do and kind of like just go and say, don't talk to me like that. That's not okay. I can do that, and she could not. And there is no way in that day, on that moment, I could move all of my kind of status to her, and she really needed that status. So what we started working on then is ideas of how do we raise her status, and what is it that I can do, and that's what I'm kind of summarizing in this talk today. So definitely what she doesn't have, what she didn't have, is this ear of management. So I joined this new organization about 8 months ago. And for me, it meant that the higher level business managers, they ask to see me once a month and they want to hear how testing in the whole organization is going, kind of like what kind of highlights could I share or how they can help us. And most testers don't get this type of a thing. And again, having these kind of like 3-layered expectations of working as a tester, working in a project and working in the organization, it makes sense that I have that, and that the channels create something relevant there. So looking at the problem of my junior colleague, it's really this idea, I think this XKCD comic is very nicely summarizing, that we have this idea of purity or status based on purity. And we are actually really bad at that at some teams. And it's really, really hard to fight against it. For years, I realized that the purity is like this, that the app developers, the software developers, they can test as much as they like, but they are somewhere on the more pure side, whereas us professional testers, either with or without automation, being able to understand the details of development or kind of focusing more on the business side of it primarily, we are a little bit less on the purity scale and the status scale. If you are an experienced person and you go into a new organization, a lot of times this is what happens, that you kind of like are a little lower because you don't again know the local concepts. So learning fast is a very important skill in that. Business testers and new testers, business testers meaning acceptance testers, those who get kind of like loaned out of the work they usually are doing to test in an important project in the end for acceptance purposes, are usually again more on the left-hand side. And test automators, if they are really only automating and not exploring really well while automating, that's a whole different thing. That's a professional tester with automation. Then probably they are, respected a little bit more because we respect code more by design in this whole industry right now. But this whole status, you can't fix it on a day one. So looking at kind of this status, what are the skills that we then need to develop? They are not that we actually would need to start learning programming better. We might be starting to, taking the route of learning programming and becoming app developers and saying, oh, we'll never allow anyone calling us testers so that we don't have to suffer all of this status problems related to the way the world still generally thinks in a very biased way. But the other route, again, I love testing. I really enjoy the hands-on skill of doing testing and finding out ways it can fail and talking about those problems and figuring out how to get those solved. The other way we can then kind of climb the ladder of getting to more status and being heard is just, gaining years, but also gaining skills that make people more likely to listen to what we say. So it's not enough for us to be productive, kind of like being the great testers, finding all the problems, both the shallow and the deep. I don't really particularly like always the shallow and deep split that we talked about in the previous talk, but finding things that the organization wants to hear and making those messages clear. There's a lot of catalytic work on that side, but especially in becoming someone who people learn from, who they pay attention to, who they want to please in some way, becoming this like trusted advisor that makes everyone better by just presence. It's even harder, and it definitely just takes, I'd say, less speaking. Well, maybe speaking in conferences like this sometimes, but in the office work, it takes less speaking and speaking at the times when you really have to. So making space for others is actually a lot more important than you being the one who knows it all and can say it all. because what you're trying to do is get others to work better, not only show that you can do that work. So looking at some of those skills now. So a lot of these skills, I think of them as communication skills, catalytic skills, whatever you want to call them. But bundling them up as communication, by the quote here, it just feels a little lazy in the sense that all problems are always people problems. They're always people's communication problems. And in order for us to be able to fix any of them, we probably need to give them other labels, more specific labels. So for example, the high level problem of status that we already talked about a little bit. That high level problem of status, what we probably want to do to fix that is to call out the difference of status and talk about the idea that if we were all hired in this team and we had a thing we were supposed to be contributing, allowing us to contribute, not shooting the messenger when tester reports a problem, and not burying the message by saying, please write a bug report, we'll look at it in 6 months. All of those things, we need to have a proper conversation and gain more understanding, mutual understanding, that we're all in it together. But that's not the only problem that we're trying to solve. So let's look at some of those. So to not be lazy, I collected a few pieces of advice on listening, on learning, on persisting, on visualizing, collaborating, choosing and making an impact. So I couldn't sum these up into anything smaller, but this is kind of my list of things. So let's talk about them one by one now. So first of all, the first thing that we started working on with this my junior tester, who is not junior by age, but junior by years in the software development industry, is working with the whole team on skills around not only speaking, but being quiet, choosing when to speak, looping back to what someone else was saying, moving the thing that you wanted to be heard into someone else's mouth, because it was heard better by someone else amplifying it, us recalling the information that was important to bring back so that we would remember what we had agreed, what kind of things were really relevant for that development effort, and building patterns out of all of this. Like what kind of problems we typically have, being able to tell those stories as, remember 2 weeks ago when we had this conversation, we were expecting there would be this kind of problem. Now we're seeing that problem. So not this kind of like smart ass type of I told you so back then, but kind of, being a little bit like a history of the project. So not always getting your word in, but choosing which things you had to be saying. Similarly, we needed to really work on the team's developers' capabilities of hearing. And after now multiple months, I think occasionally what we manage to hear in the moment and repeating what the other person said is definitely something that gives you the idea that they actually heard you. But we are still in that particular team completely struggling with them remembering in the later days. So note-taking skills around that, and note-taking for myself isn't enough. It's the team's people, different people who need these mechanisms. So again, for kind of establishing this pattern or this type of activity in the team, I could go as a more senior tester and lend my privilege to the more junior tester, could say, hey, we have these problems, we are doing this. Do you notice what we're doing? And then pointing it out further. On the learning part then, it was really, really difficult and really demoralizing for the tester that I worked with, that no matter what they tried saying, no matter what they tried doing, it felt like the feedback was that they were always failing. And they weren't always failing kind of like by my status. I was actually really happy with the way they were testing, and the team was giving, praising feedback in the background. But to her face, it felt like they were telling that she can't do anything right. So we worked with this idea of what is perfection, why perfection is really dangerous, and that we should be trying to achieve good enough, and that we maybe would be trying to kind of categorize whatever we do as learning. And if half of it is successful and half of it is not so successful, we're still doing fine. Because every time we fail, it means we've at least tried doing something differently. So building this mindset, like framing where not all feedback is overwhelming and kind of a threat to your existence and your happiness in life, that was a really important skill to build. And I had not even actually fully appreciated how much of that resiliency on someone telling me no I had developed over 25 years before I realized that the lack of that resiliency was part of the problem that we were facing. Then from learning, kind of going on into the changing things. So daring to try, it's an important thing to do. If you don't try doing something different, you can't expect different results. This is something we do in testing all the time. We change the variables just a little, hoping to see new problems pop up that we can then have a conversation on, but also on the team level and even on the organizational level. If you do things by the book as they told you, if you use exactly the words that the developers were telling you to use, they still kind of just create this atmosphere where you're worried about how you can say things. So picking on people's words, I think it's the worst practice ever. So I am suggesting that it might be a best practice to, hold down a little bit on how much you go and correct people all the time, because it is really bad what we get sometimes in the testing industry in particular, but also in software development teams. The changes, I find that sometimes it's kind of like the testers, myself as a tester, my colleague as a tester, what we try to do is we work against things not moving, inertia, but also things getting messy, and we kind of get things moving when they're not, and we get things calming down when that's necessary. So making changes happen and making space for those changes is one of those things we started then paying more attention with. And for me, then kind of out of all of this experience in July, I wrote a blog post about how to deal with rejection, because I realized that I'm rejected a lot and it doesn't hurt as much anymore. It still hurts to be rejected, but nowadays I take rejection as a challenge. And if I'm not rejected, it just means I'm not working on big enough problems in the organization. And I need to kind of move, because again, the impacts that I'm looking at for after 25 years, usually the scale shows in how many people are opposing them by their very nature. So some of the signature moves that I do are around doing things that other people would find impossible. So rejection is something, so there's some advice on that. Then another skill that we started building on, or building for her, is drawing boxes. Like every single time you should have post-it notes, they're boxes, and you should have arrows between the post-it notes. And no matter what you're doing, whether it's, discussing concepts or discussing architecture, or like with these boxes, we were discussing how do we automate. The drawing actually helps you to point at something and say that, hey, I am talking about this box here. Are we still in the same box? And helps a lot with the correcting aspect of it. And similarly, when wanting to do changes.
Hi, Maaret. Sorry to interrupt you. We have last 2 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, so you cut it to 25 minutes instead of 30. All right, that's fine.
Yeah,
so let's
5
do
minutes
that way.
for quick Q&A.
Okay, I had scheduled it for 30 minutes. So again, here's an example. I'll summarize it. You can also use these kind of things. Building networks is also something you could do. Building networks means basically that it's not just you and the other, even though that's the informal relationship. You're also thinking of how others will see you in that relationship. So paying attention to that one is an important one. And then scaling, still within the 37.5 hours. You don't have to do the same things as I do at first, but year by year, try scaling the impact that you do up a little bit. That's a good thing to do. And I find that as you scale, I nowadays really hate the idea that testers wouldn't be making decisions about releases. We do. She does, my colleague does. So we are really moving from information providers to decision makers, but that's one part of scaling, and in the right kind of an organization, you probably will do that. You need to choose what you don't do. It's actually more important sometimes to choose what you don't do. And in framing all of this, it's really about speaking about stakeholders, speaking the language of business, customers, users, and impact. Those are the important words that you might need to focus on. And finally, to kind of sum this up with, I think all of these catalytic skills that we discussed here today, they are things that kind of says that everyone is responsible for their own career, and that your own career is too important to be outsourced and left for your manager. Don't wait for a service, the career as a service, but make it happen for yourself. So moving organizations might also be a good move. Don't stay in an organization that makes you feel awful. Seek for another place before you resign. That's my thing. So as final note, the tester that was mistreated, she is leaving now. She got a 50% raise by leaving the organization. And I think in the 6 months she spent with me, she learned a lot of these skills and will be much better off in her new career. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Maaret. Let me share my screen. We have few questions came from our participants. Is my screen visible, Maaret?
Yes.
Yeah. So the first question, we had a voting mechanism over here to answer the questions. So the first question is, what could be the future of exploratory testing and test automation, considering the technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning?
So I just started in my previous place of work. I spent a year on AI and ML, starting a research project and getting 1 million, well, actually 2.5 million euros project started, getting external funding of 1 million for that. So I got a chance of actually exploring AI and ML. I think exploratory testing is a better frame for trying to work in development of AI and ML than any of the others we've tried so far. So I think that's the future. We still need people involved in that process and somehow framing whatever we want the value to be.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is how to get people motivated for testing. Many issues getting fixed with the work as a design or defer to the next release.
I agreed with my team that we would do what is called a zero bug policy, that we either close them right now if they are not important. If they really think they are not important, let's close those bug reports, or we fix them right now so that we don't have to track them. And when we close them, then if we prematurely close them, follow them up with customers. So bring one customer who hates those problems and do some ensemble programming with them, like ensemble testing with them, work so that they get to show the team how much pain that is. That's a great way of getting bugs fixed by seeing how much the customer struggles.
Yeah. So we got a question from our junior testing team, junior tester. So I can so relate to your junior tester, but unfortunately I always fail. So what would you suggest to a tester who feeling disappointed or low? What do you suggest, Maaret?
Find help in the community. You are not alone.
Yeah, please feel to reach to everyone in the testing community. We are all on LinkedIn and we'll help you.
And again, like a lot of you people send me sometimes messages asking for a job. Ask for an ear to listen to you. I'm happy to talk to people. I might not be able to give you a job, but most of the jobs I've acquired over the years come from building that network of just, learning with people. It's a step towards a job.
Yeah. And one last question, Maaret, for you. So you've already brought all the skeletons in your testing closets with your signature moves and all. Now the question is, Neelambri is asking, what keeps you going in your test career, being a principal test engineer or test manager or at different levels of your career?
I think I just enjoy the work a lot. It's so versatile. And maybe the main thing for me is I think of it as kind of like this agency. I'm allowed to make a lot of the choices myself nowadays and think through impact, what's the right thing to do. So feeling empowered is what keeps me going.
Sure. And if possible, could you please share your blog links or any
Yeah, I can
links
put it
which
in
are
the
useful
chat.
to the community? Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Maaret. Thank you very much, Maaret. That's a great insights we got from it. Especially, we loved the signature moves you have taken all over your career. And I think the folks also have loved it, and you have all awesome. You're awesome answering all the questions in the things.